Welcome to the Creative Spaces Podcast. This is Rob Wenner and Kevin Booth, and we're talking to successful people about their careers, how they got started, and their surrounding environments that influence their creative process. In this episode, we're sharing some of our favorite moments from the past 25 episodes. We've had some awesome guests and a lot of fun and inspiring conversations with people. So, Kevin, let's go ahead and start with some great info about some of our guests and their creative spaces.
First up is Matty Mullins, the lead singer of Memphis May Fire, and he's also a contemporary Christian solo artist. So the thing about Matty is that he was the first episode we did on the podcast. You know, he came to us to work on his studio, and it's just, the guy's energy is so good, so positive, and working with him is really positive. We recently did his practice room for Memphis May Fire with our Studio Foam Royale. You can check that out. That's on our Instagram page. So let's hear what Matty has to say about the feeling or the experience of his vocal booth with Auralex treatment and how that inspires him. So let's take a listen.
So the idea for this room was, let me build out something that I can use just for vocals, something that, like, a space where I can feel creative and a space where I can write, but also something where I can get like really high quality vocals. So that was the idea behind this. And then I've been here for 7 years, and then just recently had started a new project with turning a closet into a vocal booth that turned out really cool. There's a walk-in closet that I was using to store gearboxes or whatever, but it was decently wide and long. And I was always like, man, this would be the greatest vocal booth room. If I just put in a window between this wall and that wall, and then, completely treated the closet, it would be a great space for a perfectly dead vocal that you can do everything you want to in post, right? It turned out really great, man. And we've already, we've been using it daily, and it just sounds killer. And it's very, like, the greatest thing about Auralex too, in my opinion, obviously sound control is the goal, the focus, right? But the way that it looks, and even the way that it smells, I will say, is creative. It feels creative. So, like, when I get into that space and it's just me in the booth and everything looks like this cool matrix like thing, and it just like it does something for me, at least, it makes me feel more creative and makes me feel more confident.
So the next clip from one of our episodes is with producer Greg Wells. Credits of Adele, John Legend, Taylor Swift, Dua Lipa, 21 Pilots, Pink, Keith Urban, Deftones, Katy Perry. Multi-instrumentalist and a great guy. And his perspective of a room and its inspiration combined with its acoustics and its importance of a creative space is really interesting. One of the best perspectives we've had. And when he starts to focus on note and frequency buildup, and I like that one because musicians better relate to note, and the idea of when a frequency builds up, you hear more of it. So you hear that note louder than you hear the other notes, and his example of that. So sometimes I think we're thinking about focusing on frequency and how to hear it and how do I listen for things in my studio when the answer is probably right there on the keyboard. Let's take a listen to Greg.
Well, you said the key word inspires, and not just inspiration in terms of inspiration, but inspiring confidence is a huge one, because trust is the key ingredient in making any kind of recorded music. If the people involved don't trust each other, you can't get the boat away from the dock. You're not going to go anywhere.
Right.
The canoe will tip immediately. It has to be some kind of trust fall, and hopefully it's like a well-researched, well-educated risk of a trust fall. But it is a bit of a trust fall. Even if you're working by yourself, you'd never really know how something's going to sound in 30 minutes from now when you keep working on it. So I have to feel like I'm not being lied to by my speakers, by the room that I'm in. And I didn't know about this stuff when I started producing records. And my first few attempts at having a studio weren't treated. I just put up speakers and just kind of went for it. And it really bit me in the butt. I would play mixes in the car. We've all had that experience where wherever you're mixing something, and then you go listen to it somewhere else and you think, why does it sound like that? That's not what it sounded like before.
So that's where the confusion goes and where the physics and the feel of the room is important from a mixing standpoint anyway.
It's as important as the sound of the speakers. It's as important as the quality of the song you're working on. Are you like, just stand in the shower, any shower that you're in, and just hum an octave. Just go, I can't really sing, but like, just go up an octave. And at some point you will hear at least one of those notes become incredibly louder than the other notes. you know, and I'm fascinated by that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
My shower has 2 different notes. It's like an F and a G right next to each other, just a whole tone apart. They're so loud. And if you talk in there, it sounds so weird because those 2 frequencies are just cranked. Something about the shape of that room. You know, I remember I had again, back to boredom, but I was in early high school and we had a stairway that I'm sure is still there. And it went from the ground floor of the school and it went up to kind of like a little, what do you call it when it's like, it goes up and then there's a little platform, then it goes up again and then you're on the second level. Mm-hmm. I've learned that if I stood on that little intermediary platform thing in one corner of it, facing the stairs up and down, and if I hummed a note that was somewhere between a B flat and a B, somewhere in there, that pitch, that octave, the whole thing sounded like the walls were going to fall down. It got so loud. It was like this big, like pipe organ note. And if I got just a half step away from it onto an A or up to a C or something, it just sounded like I was standing there going, But if I hit that one note, it was crazy. It got so full and loud. And I was not being loud. So every room has at least one bizarre tone to it. And quite often there's like tons of weird stuff happening. And then the reverse can happen too, where certain notes, frequencies are too quiet. And there's big gaps missing of information that won't be missing when you play it in your car, that won't be missing when you sit in front of a record label executive and they're playing it on their stereo. And, you know, you're going to hear all this stuff that you never heard before. That is more than anything why I decided to get so serious about my listening experience in the studio, because I had so many meetings where I would really confidently go in and play some, like, I mean, talking about really embarrassing stuff, like where you just want to draw a manhole in the street and jump in and never come out again, you know, like sending it to very powerful people in the music business. And I hadn't checked the mix somewhere else. And I just thought, oh, it's great. I'm going to send this in. And it was disastrous, you know, because I keep the lights on by the way the music sounds, the music I work on. That's how I get repeat work. That's how I get any work. It's what my entire reputation is really built on. And if I'm sending out, you know, food that doesn't taste good, I'm not going to get people to come pay to eat in my restaurant. So I just really tried everything and went through all these different speakers and took room tuning quite seriously. And it's been a process, and it's always a process. And I'm almost done building a new studio right now that we've been working on for quite a long time. You know, I'm sure I'm going to get into that then. Like, we've got stuff in place where my fingers are crossed that the way that we've built the control room is going to work, but I won't know till I hear something, you know. You know, and actually there's a second room where I'm going to put drums, and it's way, 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 way too live. And I'm going to bug you guys about, you know, what Auralex stuff I should get to just kind of like tamper that room, because it's a beautiful live thing. I don't want to kill the live thing.
Right.
No.
Nope.
But
right now it's almost like a cave.
It's like too much.
You know?
So next up, Rob, is Ray Luzier. He's the drummer in Korn, formerly David Lee Roth, currently KXM, and formerly Army of Anyone. Ray is such an incredible drummer, really identifiable too. And he just goes into the detail and the idea, you know, really great sounding drums, mic pre's, and a room sound. It's kind of all you need, and how you can get professional results. What he has was a room above the garage with angled ceilings.
And then a spare bedroom as his control room.
So a difficult environment, but he talks about some of the feedback he got from the tracks he was doing there. And let's take a listen to that.
A lot of us have just been doing us fortunate enough to have home studios. I've been working my butt off, tracking a lot of stuff in my home studio. And
Awesome.
It's an amazing thing. You know, I really got my control room together. I got some great mic pre's. And I had the drum room to get, Rob helped me with finishing my drum room with the phenomenal Auralex products. But I didn't have my control room together. I had very basic stuff. So now I got some great mic pre's, and some top-notch, you know, gear. It's very simple. I don't have a ton of stuff, but you don't really need that. If you got good ears and you know what you're doing, you don't need to have a Neve console in your home studio, you know?
No.
It's the way technology is. I mean, I'm doing tracks. I just delivered another 3 to some girl in the UK, and I did a track for these kids, up and coming 15 and 17-year-old pop kids in Australia, to somebody in Ohio. So I can send everything right here from my house in Franklin, Tennessee.
Awesome.
And it's an amazing thing, man. It's great. If you go from like the huge people like the Nick Raskulinixes to Bob Ezrin's to Ross Robinson's, everyone, all those big guys that I work with, like it's really weird to see their techniques because everyone's got their own thing. Well, don't do this, but don't do that. The end result is the end result. When people are listening, well, now on their phones, but I was going to say when they're holding a CD, that final product is everything. So it doesn't matter your little secrets, your little thing. Does it sound great or not? Does this music move me? Does it? But I never thought I could achieve that from a home studio. I'm thinking, man, it's going to be, it's mediocre, but you can do it. It's quite possible.
End of the day, though, you got to be a good player, right?
Exactly. And there's too much fixing these days. There's too many mediocre players out there that know they can get away with playing mediocre in the studio because they're going to get locked up and beat detectives and all that. And even singers, they're singing and they're pitch correcting and the guitar. But it's, practice, kids. Go play your instruments, man. We're all humans. It's like, and I'm guilty myself. There's records I've done that I played and I know I'm like, there's a couple mistakes on there. And I get the record, I'm like, oh, they fixed all that. And I'm like, in one way, I'm like, oh, thank God. But in the other way, I'm like, you know what? It had a personality, that mistake on there. I like that little glitch. And I kind of sped this up a little bit and slowed this down. Too much stuff today is so stiff sounding, it's so, come on, so I'm fortunate here. Like, I won't fix anything that I release from here unless it's a blatant mistake, because obviously the record's going to live on. But I did something not too long ago in here where I turned the tracks in. The people didn't know where I did it. They go, well, this sounds like NRG, which is a high studio in Los Angeles, which was one of my favorite places. They go, this is like NRG quality. And I go, do you want to see where I did it? And I took my computer in here and I turned the fifth bedroom into a control room. They're like, there's no way. And I'm like, and I'm not saying it's superb, the best ever in the world, but it's super high quality and people are stoked with it,
Right. It's not a big room.
No,
per se. Yeah, but where you place the drums in the room is a big part of it too, and just where the treatment is placed.
You helped me a lot, Rob, with this room. You remember because you walked in and you went. And it went, how is it ringing so much in this little room? Because if you see the size of the room, you'd be like, wow, this is going to be dead. But I want it live, which is why we have vinyl floors. So it's above the garage. So I couldn't pour sand in the floors, obviously. So it's a very live room. So the Orlex really helped me out to control the sound and really tone it where it was getting out of control. My wife makes me keep it clean because I get
there you go.
I get nutty. It turns into my old LA studio where there's like 15 coffee cups under my floor tom and like just junk, potato chip bags. And she's like, no way, get this out, And she's right, because when I walk in, it's such a clean, fresh feeling in here. It inspires me to play, I started putting up plaques and things that, awards and records and things like that. And it kind of anything you can to make it just more inspiring,
Next up is Brad Divens. He's a musician, guitar player, singer, bass player, great bass tone, front of house engineer for Enrique Iglesias, Linkin Park, Garbage. But he turned a basement studio into a working professional studio. He loves the response of his room and his mixes translate. He doesn't have to listen to them in other places and check them. So let's hear what he has to say about that.
This part of the basement was gutted, and it sat this way for the longest time. And believe it or not, my wife kept saying, when are you going to build a studio? When are you going to build a studio? Are you going to build a studio?
Wow.
Yes, really? I think you married well, Brad.
Could she
sure
my
did.
wife, perhaps?
So we hire a guy, and he comes in, start building the room. When I was building the room, I was thinking, you know what? I just want a space that I can mix in. People can send me stuff. I can do it in Pro Tools, or I could bring my live tracks in here. I can experiment with plugins. I can do mixes for the bands I'm working with. I can do whatever, seminars. Towards the end of the process, I'm like, you know what? I think I need an ISO room just in case I decide I want to record. At least I can do guitar overdubs or bass or vocals. And so put in an ISO room. Well, this room was it was double drywall. There was green glue in between the drywall. Everything was insulated behind it. And then, you guys helped me with the design of what I should put in here. And I put in exactly how you guys laid it out. And it's perfect. Anything that I've ever mixed and sent to people, I've never gone to my car. I've listened to it on my near fields or maybe in the headphones, and I send it. let them go to their car, let them go wherever they're going to go. And I've never had an issue with, oh, there's not enough low end, or there's too much low end, or, fortunately, everything translates. Everything about it. I mean, all the panels, put the 3 up top, the 3 behind the monitors. Then I've got the panels all the way around. And then the ISO room is completely dead. I made the booth, be as dead as it could be, just because I was going to put loud amps in there. And I wanted to be able to crank stuff up and have it be somewhat isolated from the room out here. So if I do vocals or anything, I'm going to do them outside of the ISO room, because I've got on the other side of the studio, I've got a whole entertainment area that's all tile and drywalled, and there's stone. I recorded sax out there for this project I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
I could put vocalists out there. Plus I have your mud guard that I can stick people out there and we can sing into that.
Next up is Daniel Rowland. Daniel is an Academy Award-winning and Grammy-nominated engineer, producer, and music technologist. He has a really interesting studio spot, really beautiful view of the Hollywood Hills, right?
Yeah, that's amazing.
Which means he has a lot of windows. Windows are a studio issue, but a good view is inspiring. So we tried to find a balance between the two. And he talks about the use of our Progo 26, which is a movable fiberglass fabric covered panel treatment. It's absorption on both sides. You can move it around and do a lot of different things with it. And the great thing about that is like tuning the room. Where does the microphone need to be to sound best? Where does the acoustic treatment need to be to sound its best? The conversation about plugins and corrective plugins for acoustics, and we delve into that a little bit. We get that question a lot at Orlex, and there's good and bad in that. And one thing that everybody agrees is that while it can help you with some things, it's not a catch-all for all problems, especially low-frequency problems, because those sound waves still exist in the room, no matter what correction you've done on the 2-bus coming out. So let's listen to what Daniel has to say about that.
I ended up, instead of, I was in Nashville, and Adrian Blue and I were sharing a studio that I helped him build there. And when I came to LA, it was like, do I want to have a standalone facility separate from my home? How do I want to do this? But I found a house that I just fell in love with, has a beautiful view of the city. The studio, what I converted into the studio space, has a great view, but it's not designed as a studio, right? It's not a built-out proper space. But I was committed, inspiration-wise, like this is where I wanted to be. So it became a challenge. Like, how do I make this still a vibey spot, right? But acoustically treated so that I can work professionally, especially doing mixing and mastering stuff, right? It's not just composing and songwriting and that kind of stuff. So that's when I reached out to Orlex and said, help, like, what can we do with this? Because, there's these beautiful windows as an example, and I don't always want them covered, but there's times when I need them covered, right? So that's where, you guys reached out. And I mean, the room is amazing. Everyone who comes in this room now, you walk in, you immediately hear, the treatment, right? The room is just, it's awesome. So I got the vibe with the proper bass trapping, with the movable panels, with all that stuff. So in a place like this, there's, those panels, they work as acoustic treatment when I'm mixing or mastering, but they also work if I want to build a quick vocal booth. I don't need a separate vocal booth, right? I can take it and build it out of the same stuff. It's just been the flexibility and the portability of them has been something that I hadn't really, I'm used to gobos in a studio, right? Like a proper studio, right, but not that I could use for so many different purposes. So it's been, there's a number of, I got 2 or 3 different studios in the house, and depending on what we're doing in any given one, I can kind of tote things around and put them where they're needed. So it's just been invaluable for that, honestly.
Awesome.
It's funny. I just had a conversation with one of my students yesterday about this. He's asking, he's got $100. He wants to buy studio monitors. I was like, well, you can buy something and that's great, but obviously he doesn't have money for treatment and all that kind of stuff. And you can buy SonarWorks reference, and there's plugins you can buy to kind of help mitigate some of those issues. But if your room isn't treated, it doesn't really matter, right? It doesn't matter what plugin you use. It doesn't matter what speakers you buy. You're screwed. You might as well be on headphones at that point. So I typically say until you can get some treatment for your room and at least mitigate some of the reflection issues, headphones are probably your best bet. So if somebody has money for monitors, I always tell them cut that in half and spend that other half on acoustic treatment, and you'll make a crappy pair of monitors that much better, and ultimately be building towards a better long-term sounding space. I'm all for using whatever tools are going to get you there. And I think it's a combination. I do think some of the digital tools like Reference can be helpful, but again, it's only helpful. It's the icing on the cake, right? Mm-hmm. Acoustic treatment is the cake. So unless you've done that already, you're just kind of spinning your wheels thinking that those things are going to solve your problems, because they're not.
And even from the early days in class and starting out as an engineer, you're told to look at the frequency response of your speakers, of your microphone, of all the devices that you use, and you geek out on that. Never really asking the question, what is the frequency response of the room I have this stuff in?
Well, yeah, you have all the gear and all the plugins, but you're like, oh, my music still sounds like crap. What am I doing wrong? Oh, well, I'm not hearing what all these gear and plugins are properly doing. That's kind of a thing. And that's what actually I kind of backed into it, like a lot of people like that. I had all the shiny, pretty stuff, and I was like, why are my mixes not awesome? What am I doing wrong? Is it, I know all the techniques, like I've learned everything I can learn, especially with bass, which is everybody's challenge. Well, it's because my room wasn't treated properly and I wasn't hearing what was coming out of my speakers. And that's just, you kind of get there. Once you get over the toys, you start to focus on some of the more serious stuff.
Yeah, very good point.
Glenn Rosenstein, I think, is probably someone on the podcast list of guests that we've known the longest. So he's a good friend. That makes it a good episode. He's funny. We have a lot of fun talking. I think everyone has a good time talking with Glenn. He's awesome. We focus here, though, on his work at Fame Studios in Muscle Shoals, Alabama. And Fame Studios is just, there's so much there. There's so much that's been done. On YouTube, actually, there's a video, episode 1 from Fame Studios called Through These Doors with Glenn. And everyone should check that out, as well as the full episode and our interview with Glenn, because it's great. Let's listen to what Glenn has to say about kind of the reconstruction and rebirth of Fame Studios in Muscle Shoals, Alabama.
Came down here to do some work about 6 years ago. Had never worked at Fame before and went into Fame. And I met Rick Hall for the first time, and Rick's wife, Linda, and especially Rodney. Rodney Hall is Rick Hall's son. The backstory on that is I had an artist that was signed to my label and still is. We desperately needed to get some vocals done. I hadn't built this room yet, and we couldn't work in A because there was already a booking. And they had this B room that has really, at that moment, had really languished. The control room was very small, and the gear was like not what you would expect to see in a professional recording studio. And I threw up a mic out there and just direct wired right into the Pro Tools rig. I bypassed anything that was, in the studio, in the control room whatsoever. And I opened up this gal's mic, and I'm like, oh my God, this really actually sounds good. The studio side of it sounded phenomenal. And I'm put some guitars in there, and I'm like, oh my God, this is really, really good. And we started doing, a couple more things in there. And jokingly, I said to Rodney, if we just put like a couple of pieces of decent pieces of gear in here, this could be a great room. I mean, the sound of this room is as good as any studio I've ever worked at. And I don't say that lightly. Right. And the next thing you know, we're like tearing
everything up.
Yeah. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, I said, look, the room's a little bit small, and I don't want to destroy the vibe or anything like that. I mean, look, this is, for many people, it's hallowed ground. Yeah. But the control room was never designed, even from the outset. When Rick did it, he did multiple renovations. Right. From the original wall, there was a layer of carpet, and then a layer of panel, and then another layer of paneling, and then some drywall. And they never tore anything out. They just built onto it. Like archaeology, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it wasn't like that control room was like, oh my God, don't touch anything. But from my point of view, the studio side was absolutely that. Not change one thing. So Rodney didn't say it in so many words, but he was like, put your money where your mouth is, and why don't you come in and be a partner at Fame and build out this room? And that's exactly what I wound up doing. Mm-hmm. So we went back to the studs, and we just tried to get as much cubic footage of air in that room as possible. We took down one wall that was not a supporting wall because I had to have an SSL 6000E. And the reason why I had to have an SSL 6000E was because, how many times am I going to do this? The back in the day, for as much as I tell you I love the new stuff, of course, but it's in the context, certainly, of a place like Fame that is going to demand certain, there's certain design elements that are going to have to be, honored and all of that.
Right.
So we go back to the studs, we take a wall down, and I go to Paul Savasta at Odyssey Audio, and I say to him, find me an SSL 6000E that's in condition, that's not been like road beat. And he found Stevie Ray Vaughan's console, the console that all that stuff was recorded on. So, from a marketing point of view, that
fits.
Lit up. Yeah, that fits. That worked well. Paul did an amazing amount of work on getting that to happen. And we got ourselves a really good tech guy, a guy named Vince Fast. And he did, the recap and the stuff that we needed to do. We put in a atomic power supply, which, I think makes this console sound better, but what do I know? And the Tangerine automation system. So we upgraded the automation system. And I think that the room sounds amazing. Now the control room meeting.
Yeah.
I think we took
really
some
cool.
of the old architectural features that had not been seen in 40 or 50 years that were buried, literally buried, and we made features out of those things.
Wow.
And it doesn't, in my humble opinion, doesn't come off as cheesy, and the room sounds freaking great.
Awesome.
And we had a couple of things that we needed to tweak. And what was great was you guys came in, and helped us out. And I'm not an acoustician by any stretch, but I know what I hear.
Right.
And we lucked out. And the Auralex components of this is not the commercial in the middle of the thing, but the Auralex components of it, both visually and sonically integrated in a way that was beyond Rodney and I's expectations. The diffusion is spot on. We put some stuff in an area. We were very insistent on having these 2 racks that had like almost a cove where you could privately sit, and we were getting some standing waves, and there were some things that we needed to kind of address, and using those
the bamboo lens, sustain lens,
really, really worked.
Yeah, it breaks it up
really
and spreads it out, so it's a better listening experience sitting there. Kayleigh Moyer, percussionist, drummer, and clinician. Credits of Keith Urban, Ashley Clark, Reignite, Barrage 8, Postmodern Jukebox. Great drummer. Reached out to Auralex Acoustics to work on her studio in her house. She knows how to tune her drums. She's got great sounding drums. We helped her tune the room. I just like what she says, on the topic of creative space, about the importance of the room and the feeling when you first walk into a room. That kind of sets the stage for what you're going to do there. If the room sounds bad, that's a negative cue. And if it's a mess, it's a negative cue. So let's hear what she has to say.
Something about walking into the right recording studio, it almost feels like a church. It's a very, the room itself, all the people that have come through it and made music in it, kind of has this almost spiritual experience where all the music that's made there is also a piece of it's left there after you've performed it. It's in the walls. That's why I love more historic studios, is kind of having that. I don't know. It's more of a feeling. It's everything. It's hard on a stage to be able to focus in and have that tunnel vision to really focus on the drums in front of you. But in a studio, the right environment, the lighting, the sound can really just draw you in and internally and just be able to focus. So setting my own studio up, that was going to be important to me. The lighting, the look, the color, to be able to, this is where I want to come, and I want to be able to focus and learn about myself more and be able to let what's inside of me speak through my playing, and just kind of having the right environment is everything. Having a room that's not too dead, that still lets my drums' individual characteristics come through. And I love hearing the differences of the studios in Nashville. Some are all wood on the inside, some are very padded in, some are like slate or rock.
Yeah.
And I love what that does to the sound too, because drums are wood. So you put them in a wood room and they sound really good, but you're not drawing out, you're not hearing the individual characteristics of that kit. But you put it in a room of rock and slate around you, and suddenly it's like I'm hearing these little pieces of the wood grain, coming out, and how each snare drum sounds different because I'm not just adding on top of that wooden sound. I'm really drawing it out. So I like to think that my room at home is kind of a mixture of everything that I wanted. It's not, it's in my house. I still have the tall ceilings and it's a big size room. So I still have enough of that live drum room sound. It's not too dead. Having my cloud above my drum set definitely helps with that. But just being able to have a big enough space for the drums so that they have a good room sound and it's controlled. And then just having that environment where I can focus and really bring out my best.
Thanks again for listening to Creative Spaces. Before we go, please make sure you follow Creative Spaces on YouTube or Twitter. Like, subscribe, leave us a comment, then head over to Orlex.com where you'll find a ton of information about making the right choices when it comes to acoustic treatment and sound isolation for your creative space. You can also purchase Orlex products on our site or visit your favorite Orlex dealer. Thanks for joining us.